Hello, Tozzi Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am your host. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really excited to be sharing with you this interview with Sasha on codependency and sobriety. We have a beautiful dialogue where we explore many facets of sobriety and what does it mean to be in a codependent relationship and how we can navigate it. I think this conversation is really timely right now in week 7 of quarantine or whatever week we're in. At this point, I've so lost track. I've noticed that there has been an increase of people leaning on alcohol. And so I wanted to have a conversation with somebody who does this for a living. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Tozzi Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. But before I get to the interview, you may have noticed I did not release a new episode last week of Reclaim the Podcast as much as I've wanted to, because I actually have a question that I received that I want to answer on the podcast. And so I meant to do that last week, but I got, hit with this terrible migraine. And I continually struggle with honoring where I'm at and honoring my needs and honoring my commitments. And that line between wanting to honor self and wanting to honor others. And at that point in time, I decided it was time to honor self. And this is really hard for those of us who are people pleasers, those of us who really want to show up in the world and be perceived a certain ways. To choose self almost feels like a letting down of others. And that was certainly my experience. I felt a lot of guilt. And that guilt didn't stop me from doing what was right for me. And I was able to be with the guilt because guilt is a part of the human experience, right? Wherever we try to deprive ourselves of the fullness of the human experience, we're also depriving ourselves of the joys of the human experience. So there's nothing wrong with experiencing guilt or shame or resentment or disappointment or anger or anything else. All feelings are valid. It just doesn't necessarily mean that there is something wrong when one of those emotions come to play. So thank you all for your compassion as I navigated that. Luckily, migraine is gone, and I am really excited to be here and to be sharing this interview with you all. Let me read to you Sasha's bio. Sasha is a woman who writes, hypnotizes, and heals. She's a certified coach and hypnotherapist and firmly believes in hope, healing, and daily miracles for all. Addressing life from a mind, body, soul perspective, she helps free people from the codependent cages they didn't even know they were in. She has been continuously sober since September of 2011 and claims sobriety and mental illness journey as a doorway to her full awakening and creativity. She values freedom and peace above all. You can go to the show notes if you want to learn more about Sasha, and anything that we share on the podcast will also be on the show notes. Let's bring Sasha on. Okay, hello. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. Before we even started recording, I just want to name that you are looking absolutely fabulous. Love the hair, the earrings. It's just beautiful. Thank you I don't know if you dressed up for Reclaim, but I'm just going to act like you did just so that I get to feel a little special about it.
I did. I dressed up just for you.
Yes. Welcome to Reclaim, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Thais. I'm happy to be here and connect on this.
Yeah. So we've been kind of circling each other's spheres for a long time. We've seen each other's work evolve in a long time. But for people who are new to you or not necessarily familiar with how your work has evolved, share a little bit about you, what's important to you, how you put your work out into the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, sure. So I came out into the online space in 2015, and it's evolved so much since then, as I'm sure yours has.
Yeah.
And everybody that's in this space, it's so many iterations and redirects. And so I came on as a recovery coach and launching a blog and writing a lot, writing for different publications online, and just getting, coaching people with addictions and mainly recovery, mainly alcohol and sobriety. And then I moved into working with a lot of codependency work, and many of the underlying behaviors of that brings us to self-abandon, which I consider addiction. So just the deeper work. And then I moved into, so I kind of just kept on my path, and I got involved in different modalities like yoga and yoga for recovery and Reiki and then hypnotherapy. And so now the bulk of my work is I would consider, I do hypnotherapy with clients and healing work. I don't relate as much to the coach title, but I mean, there is some mentoring and guidance that is similar to what a coach would be bringing to the space. And I work with a lot of, I still work a lot with codependency, different conditioning that we have around a lot of women that have like perfectionism, people pleasing, low, like self-criticism, low self-worth, which is why I love your message too, is that you speak to a lot of these topics. And so I've just loved your work. And especially in the last year, I feel like we've converged to be more similar and speaking about similar things. So from like a very gentle therapeutic standpoint. And so that's what I do with people. And I like to write a lot. I'm trying to work on my first book. But like I'm not working on it a lot. But it'll happen at some point. But yeah.
I've been working on my first book since I was born. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I do feel like there's such a beautiful marriage between our work. Something that you speak a lot of that I don't, of course, is sobriety. Maybe not, of course, but you do speak more about sobriety than I do. And I feel like I love that, the fact that there is such a gentleness in your conversation about sobriety, and that there is such a curiosity about navigating recovery and navigating something that I tend to see in the world, not in all conversations, of course, but in the world, a lot of toughness around recovery, and a lot of kind of shaming people for choosing alcohol as their method of choice. And then a lot of, like a perspective that if you become addicted to alcohol, it's because of your own failing, more so than a strategy in which you a strategy in which felt most accessible to you. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you came to this approach in recovery, and maybe a little bit of your own story if you feel willing to share.
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, I think that there's a time and a place for like tough. Well, so any coping mechanism that we have, whether it's turning to alcohol, turning to food, turning to kind of anything that gets us out of our bodies, is just that. It's a coping mechanism. So we're trying to get some kind of need met and feel safe. And we've chosen, well, not even chosen, but like right. Our conditioning has, yes. It's not even about like the alcohol or the food or the whatever our quote drug of choice is. It's just, it's just us trying to get a need met and not knowing a better way and just trying to survive. And so that's what we have, and that's what we use in the moment and we turn to. So I think speaking to like the moral failing, I like cringe when I think of, because I remember when I got sober at 26, and prior to that, I had mental health struggles. Like I attempted suicide when I was in high school, and I remember thinking that it was a moral failing to just have depression, to just not know how, like, why couldn't I get my shit together? Like, why couldn't I do the life like I felt like everybody else was? Like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
And I think that is pretty prevalent in the sobriety conversation, but I just definitely I don't agree with it, and I agree with a more compassionate approach, because it's serving a purpose, it's serving a need, and otherwise it wouldn't be there. And so compassion, even though it's so counterintuitive to what most of us have been taught and conditioned into and grown up with, is really such a big like healing tool, to just have compassion for like, this is how I am, and this is where I'm at right now, and it's okay to be here, as opposed to like, I gotta fix this thing about myself because it's disgusting.
Yeah. And I like how we both pivoted and you used the word choice and then pivoted away from it, because I think that right there speaks to so much of the self-development world that I know we've both kind of stepped back from, that really pushes a narrative of you're choosing something and therefore you get to choose something different. And there's a lot of emphasis on this idea of choice, as if we are making conscious decisions to harm ourselves, conscious decisions to harm other people. And I feel like that really misses the mark. That the human brain is so much more complicated than just this idea of choice or not choice, or you're either choosing good or you're choosing bad. But it's a very loud narrative, and so it's easy to fall into the trap of believing like, yeah, I'm making this choice, I'm choosing this, and then it takes a recalibration of stepping back and being like, actually, I didn't choose this. This was conditioning. This was pushed on me. This was part of the cultural experience that I'm living in. And now I get to be really tender to that and see what else I can pull from that. And that's where the choice lies, right? Once we can step back and really honor that this wasn't the choice, now we get to decide how we want to move forward.
Exactly. And that was so beautifully put. I think there's a lot of, it's well-meaning because we want to give people empowerment.
Yes.
Like we want to empower people that they have choices, they have agency. You get to make choices in your life. Otherwise, it's kind of from the viewpoint of like, you're not helpless or powerless. Right. Like you get to choose some things.
Right.
But then in this circumstance, we all have this conditioning where it's like just that balance of what is a choice and what isn't a choice, and how can I get to a place of where I actually can choose what's next, as opposed to responding from automatic subconscious patterns.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes, I love that. And so, I feel like that's where so much of the compassion work lies, that you do, that I do, that shit's really hard. And right now, particularly in the current climate that we're living in with the coronavirus, I mean, things are really overwhelming. And it makes so much sense why, when things get really overwhelming, that we want to move towards the things that we have moved towards in the past, even if they didn't necessarily help us. It feels safe in that way. And that can be so confusing for people who, on the one hand, knows that it's not what they want to do, but on the other hand, can't help that gravitational pull towards it.
Yeah. And so right now, and that's where the compassion piece comes in. But I want to be really clear that like self-compassion isn't necessarily like I guess there's just a distinction, right? Like it's self-compassion, but it's also accountability, and
Yeah,
that
it's not enabling.
it's not enabling. Exactly. So it's like, oh, it's okay that I didn't take care of myself today, and I'm just gonna, it's fine. Like, I forgive myself and I'm gonna keep doing it. Like we want to have strike some sort of, it gets very layered and nuanced because we want to forgive ourselves and not harp on what we think we might be doing wrong, or mistakes or lapses, or going to old coping behaviors. But we also want to, like, challenge ourselves to be like, well, like what did I learn from this moment, and like how can I maybe tweak things so that I'm in a better place to respond to this next time.
Yeah. Right.
And I think there is that, like, it's like the and both conversation of like, it's not about just letting yourself like off the quote unquote hook for everything, but it's about like just really treating yourself like you would, you know, I do a lot of inner child work with hypnotherapy, regressing people back to their childhood and really getting them in touch with that little person, so that like they realize that they still, like, that little boy or little girl is still inside of them, and that, you know, integrating the adult self with the child self, and so that when you're like talking to yourself and taking and living, it's like you're also doing all those things to your little child. So it's like, in the same way that you would take care of a child, like a child needs structure but also needs play. A child needs routine but also needs to have fun and let loose. Like, so it's working with the with all of these like seemingly opposing dynamics and finding your own equilibrium within them.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense why when people are really rigid and hard and righteous and defensive and attacking themselves, really hypercritical of themselves, it makes a lot of sense that then they think that the opposite of that is to just let everything and anything fly. And, you know, that's, I think, where the challenge lies, is we often think of taking self-responsibility as being super critical, right? And so if we are taking responsibility, it means that we're being really harsh on ourselves. And being compassionate is the opposite of being responsible, which means to kind of let anything fly and to be super forgiving. And I actually find that dichotomy, that dynamic, are both the same things. Oh my gosh, Sasha. We're currently using like the new upgraded Zoom, and they have little emojis that you can give each other. And Sasha just gave me a hand clapping emoji. That was amazing.
Well, I liked what you were saying, so I wanted to give you a round of applause.
Yeah, I think that's the dynamic that people fall into. It's the extremes. It's either we hate ourselves or we love, which means anything flies. And I think what you're talking to is a completely different. It's not even on that binary. It's a completely different approach and experience of self and others through a lens of self-compassion, which to me just means really a sense of curiosity, a self of exploration. Why did I do this? What can I learn from this? What was propelling me to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And when we're curious, we have to be compassionate.
That's so well said. And I'm glad you defined it that way, because I think some people might hear the word self-compassion and either be like, what exactly does that mean and look like?
Yeah.
Or like, just kind of assume that it's just like kind of letting yourself indulge in anything you want.
Yes.
So I think it's really important to be super clear. And I'm really glad that we kind of dove into that a little, because curiosity is the thing that makes the difference between like beating yourself up or just not making any like forward moves.
Yes, exactly. And it's also so disorienting for those of us who have been really harsh and rigid to ourselves for so long, to practice this capacity of of forgiveness, to experience this capacity of not keeping ourselves on the hook for days, months, years over something that we did in the past. And so that is also an invitation of like, what is to forgive while also honoring the need to grow and the desire to grow. So I think what we're both saying, at least in terms of sobriety, or at least not just sobriety, but any behavior that we notice ourselves doing that feels like backwards, or feels like we're kind of activating old patterns, is to really be able to hold it with a curiosity of why we're doing that, how we can set ourselves up for success. If we notice ourselves sliding into behaviors we don't want, it means that there's something there for us to notice, right? And that then needs to be explored and attuned to and tweaked and changed and modified, instead of just letting ourselves going back to the old behaviors over and over and over again.
Yes, completely. So in the context of the current climate and relying on, or just sobriety and like relying on drinking, I think it's still just an opportunity to like get curious and explore why you might be turning to like alcohol to get through this, or like bringing in that compassion where it's not about shaming yourself or feeling bad or thinking that you are wrong or bad or that you did something wrong or bad. It's just about like, oh, what just happened? You know, like why did I do that? Why did I turn to that? What did it do for me? And like kind of just creating some distance between yourself and the substance, and just zooming out and being like, and looking at it curiously and exploring, just how you were speaking to it before. And even though this is a high stress, environment that we've never been in before, you're still, and it's totally understandable why anyone would feel that stress in their nervous system and want to go to certain things and old coping habits or current coping habits. It's still worth looking at it and exploring. Right. It's still like not a I know someone who's I spoke to who's like trying to get sober in this. Like I think she was like 2 weeks sober, and then quarantine happened, and then she had a lapse, and then she's like she's getting back up and like wants to be sober through this. And it's just like, it's a great opportunity to get sober. If that's the path that you were on anyway, even though the quarantine is happening, and or look at, the role of, if you're indulging in like the quarantine-y lifestyle, like look at, like kind of get curious about that and what it's doing, because I know it's such a socially acceptable, like cultural thing. And I think a lot of people are romanticizing it right now. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not really in those circles that do, but I've heard a little bit about the quarantine and about like, oh, happy hour starts way earlier since I'm at home all day. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I would encourage anyone to just like have a conversation around that, like a real conversation, even if it's just with yourself.
Yeah. It's really, what you said sparked something with me. I've been noticing myself, those of you who have listened know that I've recovered from eating disorder. I talk a lot about navigating eating disorder, body dysmorphia, body image stuff, like all, health at every size. I talk about that often. I'm very passionate about that. And, for me, reading anything about people joking about the quarantine 15 has evoked a lot of anger in me, because it's trivializing, and it's problematic for so many reasons, right? It's ableist, it's privileged, it's fat phobic, it's, perpetuates weight stigma, et cetera, et cetera. diet culture mentality, all of the things that like I want our culture to move against, right? So to me, those memes aren't funny, and I get kind of upset and offended and frustrated at them, and I have to just like glaze over it and move on. I'm curious if that's a similar experience that you feel to see people trivializing alcohol and kind of romanticizing it. If you do have that activation, maybe not. But I imagine that, having had the shifts that you've had from drinking to non-drinking and seeing how much that supported you, and then to see people kind of trivializing, romanticizing alcohol. Yeah, I just wonder what your experience of that is.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally appreciate that. And especially I've had eating disorders too. And so I feel it on a lot of different levels of just like the like just making fun of issues that are serious. And while I think that sense of humor is really important, I'm sensitive to people that are not in that place where they can find that funny and it's actually like shaming.
Right.
And I don't personally feel attacked by alcohol memes, but I don't see them really. And it's like not on my radar. And I kind of I think it's just been long enough at this point that it like kind of just goes over my head and I'm like focused on my agenda for the day. Right. Like I want to speak to the people that are going to hear me. And unfortunately, I mean, I'll get like a tinge of sadness sometimes. Like, this is kind of sad that like this is like that this is being perpetuated by a meme, and so people think that it's like okay. It's like okay to like be drunk by 10 a.m. because we're in quarantine, and like that's so the fact that the mass media like thinks that's funny just goes to show what systematic problems we have. So that makes me sad when I really stop to like process it and think about it. But like most of the time I was talking about this earlier today. I don't scroll very much. I just like post and run. I post and ghost. And so I don't, but like I'll see some stuff like, I scroll a tiny bit here and there. But there's just not as many opportunities for me to like see a lot,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before I move on from the subject, I have one last question, and then I want to talk about something else that you work with that I'm really looking forward to talking about. But what thoughts do you have for people who may be noticing that they're having a hard time with alcohol right now, whether they're seeing an increase in their consumption or they're experiencing bigger cravings towards alcohol right now? If they're sober, what do you recommend or help them think about during this time?
Yeah, I think that it's important to just get support. So I know that I've put on a couple of free virtual healing circles. I know tons of people that are doing it, not necessarily sobriety specific, more just like mental health, but it's related, right? But then there's tons of like sobriety specific kind of like just support groups that you can access virtually. And then of course, like there's the 12-step route that now all of the meetings are online. Right. That and the cool thing that I'll say about that, and just all the people doing recovery work online, that you can access like some free support in this time now, is that it takes away the any sort of shyness or ambivalence about showing up in real life in a place, like especially with 12 steps. So you can just, and that's just one path. I get that, like not everybody's cup of tea, but if it is, like you can just drop into a meeting online and kind of be there and not, and it's like from the comfort of your home, if hopefully, and like you it takes away some of that anxiety about reaching out. But then I also recommend just like calling up a friend. I've made some efforts to get in touch with people that I haven't talked to in a long time. And it's been really, really great and special. And, it helps so much because you've probably seen me post, and it's not my quote. It's from Johan Hari's TED Talk. And he wrote all about this. He has a couple of books. That the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection, human connection. And so when we feel isolated, we're that much more likely to drink more so I think the key is to really like connect as authentically as you can with people. So whether that looks like a virtual meeting, a Zoom meeting, or just calling up a friend or like a family member, whoever, like it really does wonders. You'll like, I've had so many different times where I've been upset and like totally in my feelings. And then by the time the conversation is done, I'll reach out to my friend, even if I like really don't want to talk to anyone, I'll kind of make myself do it. And by the end of the conversation, it's like I feel 10 pounds lighter mentally from just having somebody to like hear me. And so I think it's an underrated tool that is very simple, and it's one of the hardest to do when you're in a vulnerable spot, because it's like that conditioning of like, and that resistance of not wanting to appear like you need someone or whatever the case is, but it's magical. And so that's what I would really recommend.
I love it. It's really interesting for me. I've been noticing a lot more my internal resistance to doing things that I know are going to be ultimately helpful for me. And instead of getting upset or judging myself, I've just been noticing, because I want to get so clear what is resistance and what is like a valid, intuitive kind of no, a no. And I've noticed that anytime I do something, even though I resist it with the body sense of this being resistance is something that I should do, it is remarkable what happens when I don't listen to that voice and take action anyway. The smallest thing. The other day I was like, I'm going to get dressed today. Like I'm going to, just like you are right now. I did this last week. I was like, I'm going to wear real clothes, and like, I'm going to put my face on, put some makeup on, and like act as if I'm going somewhere. And like, I felt so much resistance to doing that because it's so silly and stupid. And like, what's putting on a real shirt and blah, blah, blah. And all of the voices trying to minimize it.
Yeah.
And of course, Sasha, you know what happens, right? Is that like, I put on real clothes and I'm like, oh my God, this small thing is so significant. And like, we can all do hard things right now, right? Like we can move through resistance. We can notice it. We can honor it. And then we can move through it, because we are worth feeling good on the other side of resistance.
Yes. 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 And I've spent a lot of time differentiating or distinguishing between the intuitive no and the resistant no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm still like working that, it's so different in every situation. So I'm
Sure.
I have that question always, like when I'm in resistance, whether it's really an intuitive no, or it's just resistance because I'm uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. It is hard. There's no one can tell you what the two differences are, because it is, like you said, so contextual, and it's also such a body sense that we have to get familiar with. Because being uncomfortable is exactly that. It elicits parts of our brain to say, no, don't do it. And it uses whatever tactic it needs to use so we don't do it because it's uncomfortable. It's like, I can say this so obviously, but it's so different when it's happening in your brain. You're like, okay, but I want to shift gears a little bit because I know you talk and do some work around codependency. And I want to explore what that is. Let's just start with, how do you define codependency? Because there's so many different definitions and people use it even though they don't know why. It's like one of those words that like people use all the time and they think they know what it means, but they very rarely actually use it in the way that it means. So let's just start the conversation off with how do you define codependency?
I know. So I have a few definitions of it because it is very, it's also one of those things that's layered, but like to make it really simple and just break it down, I feel like it's just, a, I want to like tell you all the definitions. So it's a form of self-neglect, and it's like a way that an addiction to another person at the expense of ourselves. But at the same time, like we can be codependent on things. We can be like, so even on a different level, it's like giving our power away, to something else. It's like looking outside of ourselves to fill something like that can only be filled from within. So
sure.
I see codependence as like, and this is a definition that I got from one of my mentors years ago, like the disease of the lost self, where it's just like, there's not a strong sense of self. So we easily like glom onto another person or any number of things to kind of buoy us and hide behind and kind of feel like we have an identity through that. So, but yeah, like it's, in its simplest, I would say just like, an addiction to another at the expense of self.
Yeah, I think that's really potent. And for me, I am always weary about using the word codependent because I think it can imply that the opposite of codependent is to not need others. And so I'm curious how you navigate that, because we do need others, as your work has shown. It's so important to be, just as you said earlier in this conversation, about the need for support and how valid it is to connect and reach out to other people, and also that like addiction is a loss of connection in some ways. So if we know that connection is important, I wonder then, like, what is the difference between a codependent connection and a connection between two kind of whole humans?
Oh, so this is such a good question. And I'll say, it's confusing in the beginning when you're waking up to maybe your own codependent patterns, because it is typical and common, and it was in my experience, to like go to the other side of the spectrum and kind of be like, I don't like, I'll just be completely independent then and not self-reliant and not need anyone. And then like kind of float towards the middle and find again that like your own unique balance of interdependence. So yes. The difference between a codependent tie or bond in my mind and is two people using each other to fill each other up from a place of emptiness, versus like the whole persons are already feeling secure in their sense of self for the most part. Like we all have stuff, right? But they have a sense of self, and they're coming to the connection like wanting to supplement their happiness or their sense of worth, or like and kind of come together to create more, as opposed to come together because there's this like deep gaping hole inside that like they think the other person can fill.
Yes, I totally hear that. So like, I love that you use the word supplement, or this idea that like we're allowed to have like little pockets of emptiness that we're asking other people to fill. But there's a difference between that than asking someone to fill us up completely.
Yeah, exactly. So like we need other people, like we need friendship, we need romantic love, like we need sex, we need connection with human beings, we need human touch. But we need to be in ourselves, be in our own body for that to be all supplemental.
Yeah.
And a lot of us like try to do it the other way around.
Right.
And it usually doesn't work. So like the relationships that I've come to from codependence, like it's so painful that it hurts so much, but it's like it's like a drug. Like you keep, like I kept going back for that like hit of instant gratification and temporary relief, but it was never it was never like permanent, like I wanted someone to make me happy forever, and not realizing that like I had so much inner work to do, that like, and he couldn't give that to me, but I kept trying to get it from him. And so it's like, it's almost this like doomed dynamic from the start. But with that said, like, I don't regret anything. I don't regret any of my codependent, like highly codependent, highly toxic relationships, because that's what brought me here. And I've learned so much. So like, I say that in a way that's like, if you're in that place now, like, don't, like, you get to still have hope, right? Like, you get to like have that compassion piece and be like, okay, well, I can get out of this dynamic and then do the healing that I need to do.
Right. I love that. What would you say are some red flags for people to kind of alert them that maybe they've fallen into some codependent dynamics within their relationships?
So when I speak to relationships, I usually speak to all relationships, like including friendships. So I'm definitely not like exclusive to romantic partners, as far as, because these if we're codependent, it might show up more and be emphasized in romantic relationships, but we're going to bring bits of it to any relationship. So it's very applicable to like relationships with your family, your friends, even your business, like business partners, colleagues, clients, like mentors. And so a couple red flags, I would say. I'm thinking of a few specific examples. So like with friends, oftentimes, and I've helped clients with this, so I hear from them too, like when you're in a codependent tie with a friendship, you're like always on edge. and when you think about them, you're anxious, or you kind of dread having to pick up their call or call them back. Or it feels kind of more like a chore than it feels like it's fun. Because there's like a heaviness to it, because the energy is kind of like toxic, right? And I'm not putting it on this other person. I'm saying like the connection between the two people is just probably a trauma bond or something. And so that's why it feels like that. And that's why there's that like kind of like dark, dense energy associated with them. So like when you call them, when you talk to them, and you might love them still, like love them so much and can't think about, not be able to even imagine not being friends with them. But it's like, there's no uplifting in the friendship. Like you guys kind of bring each other down. Like you complain a lot together. Like you're scared to tell them your good news. And of course, this is also like vice versa, right? So from the other person's perspective, too. But you can't set a boundary with them, or like they don't respect a boundary or a line, or they kind of like push your boundaries. They don't like respect like that. When you say like, I have to go at 8 or whatever, like it's a big deal, and they kind of try to control your choices. And a lot of times in romantic relationships, it feels like a drug. So when I say like addiction to another person at the expense of yourself, it's if you feel that adrenaline rush, like that adrenaline rush from, and of course, this is where it gets a little complex, because being in love, you're likely, and especially in the beginning, like it's likely going to be exciting. So there's that differentiating between what is healthy excitement and what is maybe a sign that I'm developing like a physical chemical addiction to this person that is gonna, cause me a lot of, that is going to be like troublesome, moving forward. And it's a hard line to discern from like any kind of rule of thumb. But I would say like pay attention to your body and how your body feels. And like I've felt really, I usually feel, and I'm like pretty a sensitive person. My nervous system is sensitive. I'm very like empathic. So I consider myself like when I'm with other people, I'm like I attune to their energy. And if I feel like really drained with someone, that's a huge red flag to me. That it's not like give and take. It's like kind of one person usually gives more and one person takes more, and it's very imbalanced. And in relationships, like there's times where that happens. There's a natural ebb and flow. Sometimes one person is going through a hard time and needs more support. But it usually like
evens itself out.
Those periods don't last. They even out. Like if it's constant that one person is like has the power over you, and you are giving your power away, and it's like very much that power trip where they're above you and you're like below them, then that's a red flag. So those are some red flags.
I mean, those are a lot. And I think that it's very helpful for people to be, just as we talked about, getting curious within themselves and their behaviors, like really getting curious in their relationships and seeing if any of these red flags that you just listed are playing out in their dynamics, because, that's a portal. It's an entry into deeper exploration and understanding of self and others. So I really appreciate you listing some of those red flags.
Yeah.
The one that really resonated with me is and something I've been practicing doing is like whenever I leave a conversation with a friend, you know, I check in with myself, like how do I feel? Do I feel good or do I feel drained? Do I feel and then getting curious as to why. Well, yeah, she just spent an hour crying on the phone because she's experiencing a breakup. Okay, pretty valid that I would be feeling pretty drained. And that's not a testament on the relationship. That may just be a testament on context. But if it's like every single conversation, it feels like it's not that equality, that give or take, then that gets to be something I get to explore. And I think what we're both saying, for those of you that are listening, is not to then dump the relationship, but maybe that there needs to be some changes to the self, to your expectations of the relationship, to the boundaries that you place in the relationship, etc. I think that's really important, that I'm just thinking out loud that I don't think we talk about enough online. I think there's a lot of narratives around like dumping toxic people, you know, like ending relationships with toxic people, whatever that means. But like, if we dump everybody that's toxic, we're probably going to be left with nobody, and also won't be left with any tools for how to navigate difficult relationships, which I think is what we need more than just dumping and ending things the minute they get hard.
Okay, so you make such a good point. Thank you for bringing that up, because we're clearly on the similar wavelength, and that's why we're talking today. Just because like so many things are things I was talking about earlier or like thinking about in the last week. And I think it's so crucial to, and this again is not something that someone can like tell you. Like, yes. Yeah, you have to dump him. Like, no, you are the one that has the, that has choice. Like I never like to take choice away from somebody, but it's just giving those tools and inviting you to like explore and become more aware of your responses and what you can do. So I'll say the and both thing. Like I do think some relationships are that sometimes there's not a way to reconcile, right? Yeah. Like sometimes you do have to cut it off or let it go, or it's just you've tried to negotiate boundaries and kind of renegotiate the terms of the relationship, and it doesn't work and it becomes like it's better to just move on. Yes. And then there are other relationships that really just need to have a couple uncomfortable conversations.
Yes.
And that I did that last week with two friends, and I wasn't thinking of dumping them, but it was still like, it was like a hiccup in our friendship where if we didn't have a conversation about it, it would have hardened into a resentment. Yes. Or like kind of a future, like just created more reason to have future hiccups. Right. And so we had beautiful discussions, and it created intimacy, like it created emotional intimacy and vulnerability and like that authentic connection that is what we all want at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to take those risks. And again, speaking to resistance, like it's not going to be something necessarily that you're gonna cannot wait to get on the phone and have this conversation. Like it's gonna feel uncomfortable, and but it's gonna grow you, and it's gonna grow your relationship, and I think that that it gives you a chance to learn each other and like show up for each other. The communication is so important. Like no, people aren't going to know that, like how to show, like especially in the coronavirus, right? Because we've never experienced this before. So it's bringing up a lot of stuff that's new, like in us, like people might be reacting to it in ways that we haven't experienced them as acting like that before. Right. So it's like, it's a tremendous invitation to have more of these conversations, to see how we can like better show up for each other, because I've done it I have 4 sisters, and I have a lot of family stuff, and I've had a lot of difficult conversations with many of them, and it just, it might not always like cure the relationship in the way that you're hoping, but I've always learned so much from that conversation and grown my confidence levels and like my ability to even like know what I need in relationship, that it's always been worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we can talk about this forever because there's so much good stuff here. Maybe we'll have a part 2 down the road, who knows? But I think you made some really important points around the complexity of relationships, and that we really get to use all of these, all relationships get to be a tool for our deepening, or a tool for our self-abandonment if we want it to be. Maybe not even want, but if we're conditioned to be, right? Removing some choice, but adding some choice. But let's just pause there. And I would love, if you have any final thoughts for people as we wrap up the conversation, anything that you want to make sure that people kind of keep in mind around whatever we talked about today, or anything else.
I mean, I'll say just like be really gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
And give yourself what you need. What you really need, like what you feel will, because there's the what self-care stuff during this time especially is important. And I think when you're going into, if you're like getting locked into traumatic responses or kind of defaulting into shutdown mode, it's the basic self-care things that sometimes can get lost, like drinking water and like eating 3 meals and like sleeping at night and doing some form of exercise that feels good. Just those things, I think getting back to them if you're not doing them, or if you're skimping on them, like letting yourself take a nap and not feeling guilty if that's what you need, like just really, really like kind of like the feeling of just wrapping yourself up in a warm cocoon and doing whatever feels most nourishing and nurturing. And that's going to change from day to day. So like if I could leave you with one thing that you carry, it's like, what do I need right now? Just that question of like, what do I need right now in this moment? Okay, I need a glass of water. and then just continually asking yourself that, and the answers are always going to change. And sometimes maybe you won't even be able to meet that need in that moment, but just getting in the habit of like tuning into what your body is telling you that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that so much. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and thoughts with me and with us, the listeners. Really appreciate seeing you and having this conversation. And here's to navigating the quarantine with as much integrity and compassion as we can.
Sober cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Thais. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Guy and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.